Now, many of you are familiar with the recent craze about something called the Metaverse. People who are purchasing virtual land and clothing and houses. So why is this actually happening? Dr. Jeff Zweerink has some thoughts on the issue. Dr. Zweerink is an astrophysicist and a senior research scholar with Reasons to Believe, an organization that combines science and faith. He's also author of several books, including Who's Afraid of the Multiverse? Welcome back to BCN, Jeff.
Glad to be here today. Looking forward to our conversation.
You bet. Now, what exactly is a metaverse for people who are just joining us right now? Some say it's the same as virtual reality, but can you really explain how it works?
So as I understand it, virtual reality is a part of the metaverse, but the metaverse is really just an online arena, an online playground, if you will, where people can come in and interact. And you got virtual reality that allows you to see what's going on. You could do augmented reality, which allows you to hear and feel things in a different way. But really, the metaverse is just a digital platform that allows all of these interactions to take place, and in some sense is only limited by the human imagination and the technology we can develop to allow people to interact inside the metaverse.
So some people are actually purchasing virtual homes. Why would people knowingly spend real money on property that doesn't actually exist, except online?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in some sense, there's people that spend money on stuff that I don't understand out in the real world. But I do know this. There's probably people who are doing it because there's a status to it. People want to have the latest and greatest thing. I imagine a lot of people are doing it because there's going to be some good business opportunities where people, as people start interacting in the metaverse, if you can build an experience that people want to have, whether it's a good meeting room, whether it's a cool vacation out through the Grand Canyon or something like that, people are going to want that. And the better the real estate or the better the location and the better it's marketed, you're going to have an opportunity to have a good business model there.
I wonder if it all started with those little games. I don't know if you remember the little handheld games where you had a pet, like a pet dog. You had to take care of it. You had to feed it every day, and sometimes you had to buy food or give it a shot, or whatever, take it to the vet. Maybe it just kind of expanded from that into the metaverse. What are your thoughts?
Well, those are the sorts of ideas that are being played out there. And I find that illustration interesting because in some sense, I would really rather have a regular pet or whatever. But, it gave people an opportunity. I mean, there was some teaching value to that of teaching responsibility and discipline and regularity. And so, that's kind of what I see playing out in the metaverse there is that it's going to be a pretty remarkable tool. The question is, how are we going to use it? Are we going to use it to develop and advance humanity, or are we going to use it to do things that are a detriment to humanity?
I'm glad you brought that up. So do you think is it really good or bad overall that we have the power to create a type of alternative reality?
Well, in some sense, I think that's a question misses the point. And I'll give an analogy. Is it a good or a bad idea that we can build a car? Well, I mean, the car allows me to drive multiple places, to haul people around, to take vacations, to help other people. And used improperly, like if I give it to my 5-year-old kid, they could go out and cause a lot of damage with it. The metaverse, to me, it's a big tool. The question is not whether it's good or bad. I think it's great. It's a reflection of how God has created us and endowed us with the ability to create and advance and build technology. The big question in my mind is, how are we as humans going to use this? Because we're ultimately the people that are going to wield the tool.
Now, perhaps we got a bit of a taste of the potential impact of augmented reality after the film Avatar hit theaters. It's been said that with the beauty of the virtual world, people couldn't deal with the flatness of the real world. And especially maybe now, perhaps people are looking for escapism as they deal with the pandemic and so much depression and anxiety in our world today. What do you think?
I think that's a very big concern that we need to think seriously about. You could argue with a car that whether that's good or bad, you can kind of make the car and decide after the fact. But with this virtual reality metaverse type world, it may be before we're even aware of the problems arise, or before we can even do anything about them. And I think Avatar is a good example of that. We could give people this experience of being somewhere they weren't actually there, but it becomes kind of this very real experience. And yet now when you go back to the real world, it just doesn't seem like it's got the excitement or the beauty or the whatever. It's almost like when you take a drug or something, it makes things seem so much bland afterwards, and it takes a long time to recover. And I wonder if that's going to play out in the metaverse, that will make a world that is so engaging to be in that when we come back to the real world, it's just too depressing. And you saw suicide and depression rise after Avatar, and so that would be very detrimental to humanity. And we need to think about those sorts of things before we engage too deeply.
Jeff, some people say that the metaverse is like a spiritual counterfeit of God's universe, where we get to play God and put our world into a place we think it should be. What are your thoughts?
I'm certain that's going to be the temptation for many people. And I don't know how many, but quite honestly, when a lot of people look at God, they say, "Hey, I don't like the way He's done it. I don't like this and such thing going on." And so the idea that we can go in and create our own reality, we think we will do it better. The reality of it is, when we exercise that out in the real world, very often, again, unless you come from very good values and well thought out, we tend to make things worse. And so the idea of creating our own reality so that we can play God historically has never worked out well. And so if we're using the multiverse or the metaverse to do that, I don't see good things coming from that. We're escaping from reality instead of living in the reality that God has designed.
Amen. Now, if the metaverse continues to grow, Jeff, could this end up being even more all-consuming than our current social media channels?
Well, that's the kind of reality we're building. You get to go in and choose, whether you're big, tall, smart, fat, whatever. You get to choose what it looks like. It will enable us to live in a fantasy world for so long. And again, coming out of that is going to be increasingly difficult. I consider myself a fairly disciplined, fairly rational person, and I find myself sucked into social media. Instead of taking time to pray or think about this problem or work on this, I want to scroll through Facebook for the next funny thing that might amuse me. I just think that's an inherent problem in humanity, that we want to look for those escapes. And the more draw, the more fascination, the more beautiful, the more intriguing the metaverse is, the more it's going to do that. And we may get so far in that we can't get ourselves out because the addictive power is too great.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jeff. I was just thinking to myself, if somebody were to create this perfect metaverse with a perfect life, perfect vacations, you're driving $1 million sports car, and then you leave that metaverse, come back to your real life in the real world, that may be crushing and disappointing, and then maybe you might even fall into depression. So there's that danger as well.
Absolutely. And one of the things I find ironic about this desire behind the metaverse, and again, I think there's a lot of good things we can do in the metaverse, medical things and educational things we could do. But the idea of building another reality that is better than this one that we get to design, what's fascinating about that is that if God is who He says He is, as revealed in Scripture, that this world is a testing ground for that beautiful, perfect creation where there is no strife, where there's harmony among people, where there's all good, where you don't get tired, where you're accepted as you are. That God has created that place for us and has given us glimpses of it. And yet here we are trying to create that on earth instead of living and abiding by what He said it. And so it's kind of this odd, ironic situation where God has given us a desire for that, and we're choosing to fulfill it in a way that will probably cause a lot of damage instead of ultimately build humanity up.
I like how you touched on maybe the medical community and then maybe medicine in the metaverse. How can we potentially expand on that to really help mankind?
Well, the example I can think of is, you imagine a doctor who's got great expertise in diagnosing certain diseases. Well, right now, they're limited in terms of their ability to serve by financial constraints, but really more by how many people can come into the office, who can get there. So there's some sort of radius and time constraints on which people they can help. Now, imagine, if you will, setting up with relatively simple technology, just a room where people who have diseases can now come in and engage in that room. He can treat people, that doctor can treat people on the other side of the earth in remote villages with primitive technology to provide healthcare and access around the world that otherwise wouldn't have been available. There are just ideas like that, or the teaching opportunities of, imagine being able to take a virtual tour of the Grand Canyon where you could get down and see the rocks. There are just great opportunities because the better we can simulate it in the metaverse allows people to actually experience and learn and get real, tangible, real world benefits from it.
So, Jeff, in the end, is it really possible to escape the evils of this world to create a perfect one?
Well, I think you can make a very strong argument that the quote unquote evils of this world are ultimately related to how humanity manages the creation which God has given us. And so a lot of the tensions that you see are related to humanity's bad actions and poor choices. Well, humanity is the one that's wielding the metaverse. If we're the ones that have those problems, we're going to bring that into everything we create and make. And so the idea of building a metaverse that allows us to escape all the problems of the real world, that's just a pipe dream, because humanity is going to be the one doing that. Humanity is going to bring that same set of problems into the metaverse. So it's just not going to work to escape those problems.
I wonder what God's thoughts are as well, because, I mean, we're dealing with trials, tribulations here on this planet. You know, he's helping us to grow and to learn along the way, and there's going to be pain along the way. And then we create this metaverse, which is completely perfect, and God's like, no, wait a minute, I've created that for you in heaven here, so don't worry about it, I've got it covered. What do you think?
I think God looks, I see an analogy in my children. It's like I look at them and I do things and want them to grow. And they do, but they make bad choices. And what's ironic is some of those bad choices is like the very thing they wanted, if they just listened to me, they would have gotten had they listened to it. And I think God's looking at it that's just like he wants the best, and realize, he's given us the ability to make choices. And he's there saying, oh, I've got so much better than what you're doing. Just please listen to me. This is the way to go. And yet we continue to go do things our own way. And he's very patient with us, very loving, and is always drawing us towards him. And so I don't think God's up there saying, they did it again, which is what I would do as a parent. But God's just saying, hey, I want what's best. And he's drawing us to him all the time.
Let me ask you something. With so many people hacking into other systems right now, all of the fraud going on in the world right now, the terrorism that's taking place, do you think that the metaverse could be used as a weapon to attack maybe Western civilization?
Well, if history is any indication, that's certainly people will try to do that. I can go back and give you an example of another place where people invented something so that the idea behind it was to allow this free spread of information, to advance scientific knowledge, to benefit of humanity. And it's what we now call the internet. The whole basis of the internet was to allow scientists and academics to exchange information more readily and to advance knowledge more rapidly. Well, look what we do now. We've got to set up firewalls, and we've got to worry about spam, and we spend a lot of effort trying to keep people from misusing this very powerful tool. Metaverse is going to be the exact same way, again, because humans are the one who ultimately are going to use it. And it's naive to think there aren't people who are going to want to use it to do damage, to advance their cause, whether it's good for humanity or not.
Dr. Jeff Zweerink is an astrophysicist with reasons to believe. Thanks so much for joining us today from Covina, California.
Thanks for having me here. Enjoyed our time together.